Hi, welcome to my show. Today I have a very special guest, Iris Lee Underwood. Hey, Iris.
Hi.
So, Iris is a friend and a DWW, Detroit Working Writers member, and I am so excited that her book is coming out today after 20 years of the concept first came to her over 20 years ago, and it's finally now manifesting. And she is having this weekend her book launch party at a Lavender Farm. I am so excited that A, she's publishing her book, but B, that I will be at that launch party because I love her Lavender Farm. But
And it loves you.
thank you. And so, but before we get to the Lavender Farm, which I do want to talk about, I'd love to learn a little bit more about this book, what it is about, how long it took you to write it, if you have any. I really love the fact that you have stayed so true to this project because we have talked over the years about it here and there. So this is a really great opportunity for you to give some advice to aspiring writers or frustrated writers.
Well, when I went back to school as an older person at Oakland Community College, I took my first creative writing class since I went to college at Central in 1968. So there was an interruption of 3 children in between that and raising them. So the first thing I wanted to do with my life was get back into writing. Not that I'd been writing professionally before, but that's what I wanted to do. So my first class at OCC in the syllabus was a fiction piece. I had never written fiction before. And when I got started on my first computer, I couldn't stop. And that's when the characters came to me, the concept came to me of a small tribe of people who survived the great ruin of their world. And no, it is not a fantasy because cultures have evaporated and declined, and others have risen up. So the main line of the story is forgiveness. It's a multiple layer of love stories, and the reunion of their script to them after it was lost, after the great ruin. So, and I don't want to say.
Oh,
Oh,
no,
go ahead.
I want to ask you, this is the book cover,
Mhm.
and can you explain a little bit about the artwork here?
Yes, that is the king, the back of the king's head with his crown, and that is his mantle. And there are 2 different definitions for mantle. One is a cloak, and the other is responsibility, a person's purpose. And that is a major theme in my novel, is everyone comes to Earth with a purpose. And it is our choice if we fulfill that purpose. And this novel is one, as you said, manifestations of my purpose. I believe I was sent here to write, communicate, and as you know from my writing workshops years ago, my goal in life is to encourage people to write their story and leave their legacy. It is definitely possible. Start with your own story, and out of your story will come many other stories.
Well, that brings us back to a little bit of history
Yes.
of how we met.
Yes, yes.
So I've known you for over 20 years.
Mhm.
Reason being is because I had taken some of the classes that you had offered at Troy Public Library, and it was about this. What was the title of it?
Writing Your Legacy.
Right, as simple as that. It was writing your legacy. And I still have the journal that I wrote in that. I still have it and what I had written, and it was I remember that class, and that's why it is important that. With my last guest, Cheryl Crabb, we talked about this, about the importance of writing things that matter. That I was telling her that I think, like I can really say always since I started writing, that I felt that writers, whether it's writers, filmmakers, musicians, they do have a responsibility to the world, how we influence it, and not to be destructive in what we're doing. So I do feel strongly about that. And so an example that, yes, you were having this workshop, and in my case, it was something so memorable. And at that time, I was writing fiction, but I have evolved to writing memoirs because I think there is something very important in leaving your legacy and for your children, and so that people can learn from your mistakes or see what you're trying, why you came to this earth, and maybe there's something for them there to connect to. And so it seems that that's what you're doing in your in your novel, or is it a novel?
Yes.
Can I say yes?
Yes.
But the other thing is, I think it's also the way you live. I admire that. I know that for me, I do care not just that the book is great, but also how the person lives in their life. And I've been to your Lavender Farm, and I know some of your lifestyle, and I'm really inspired by that. So if you could just share your story about how you came into this kind of work to be a lavender farmer, what was that about really? And I have some pictures to share as you share your story.
Oh, okay. Well, life is connected. If we live long enough to become wise enough, we know that we are connected, and we're connected by our purpose. We don't know that. And it takes some wisdom and spirituality to understand that and to appreciate that. So when I went back to school as an older person in '94, my firstborn, I have 3 daughters, my firstborn was struggling with drug addiction. And in 1996, she died of a toxic reaction to cocaine and alcohol. And it was devastating. This is after struggling 8 years to save her. And my husband and I raised our children in the Christian faith. We practiced it to the best of our ability. And it just was shattering, to lose her. No matter what faith we raised our children in, even if we didn't, it would be shattering. But the fact that we dedicated them to the Lord, and every day prayed over them, and it was quite a shock. And school helped me through that. My studies helped me through that, because I was determined to receive my bachelor's degree because I wanted some respectability to my writing. I had a local newspaper picked me up. They gave me my chance. They gave me my big break. And I wrote a weekly column called Encouraging Words. There's so much discouragement in this world, and today it's much worse than it was 22 years ago.
I agree.
The negativity, the fighting that goes on within the news. So when Becky died, in this class I wrote my first piece of fiction, and the characters came alive, and I had to silence many of them. I had to delete them because I had to stay within a page limit. When I sat down at that 386 computer, I could not stop. But I had to. So I deleted these characters, and I kept, to the page limit, the word limit, and submitted the paper. But it had a life in it. It was a living thing. I passed it on to a few of my sisters. They read it to their children, and then I filed it. And then one day, my middle daughter says, Mom, I think that story about Rahab would be good for young adults or older children. Why don't you rewrite that and send it to highlights or something like that? I did, and 20 years later, here I am publishing it as an adult novel.
My goodness. I never heard of this story.
Yes. Well, very few people know the history. But meanwhile, the story is about longing for home and longing for what we've lost. And there are many, many other themes, such as the mantle, our responsibility to fulfill our purpose in life. But the longing for home is a theme that's woven throughout. I come from Appalachia. My parents uprooted me when I was 4.5 years old from the place I knew and I loved, with people I was surrounded by, with aunts and uncles who loved me, and dumped into Detroit. No friends whatsoever. Our neighbors didn't even talk to us. And we were dirty hillbillies. So it was a shock. And I assimilated through my life. I'm sort of an outgoing person. Had a pen pal from Canada when I was a kid. You know, all these little things led me to back to the story, or to the story. So, um, my mother and my father both come from ancestors who were foragers. They grew their own food. They foraged for their food. They killed their food, skinned their food, you know, the whole schmeal. Well, basically, that's what my characters do in the Mantle. They are self-sustaining characters. Really, fiction, to a great deal, is
Yes,
autobiographical.
I completely agree. And those are actually the best ones because they're the closest to people's heart. They can connect to them because there's so much reality in that. Yeah.
Right. So, but all that wonderful knowledge about medicinal herbs and growing your own food, that was snapped. That was broken when Mom and Dad moved to Detroit. So when this story came to me, that was a foraging people, hunting people, I had to do some research. So I went to Seven Ponds Nature Center and studied medicinal herbs, and that's where I met lavender. And I brought some plants home, planted in my gardens, and realized, you know, the more I handle this, the lesser my migraine headaches are. The
Really?
healthier I'm feeling.
See, I just put up a picture if you can see that.
Yes.
This is Iris's farm.
My little hen house.
Now people know I love to go there. I'll find any excuse when she has literary events. I love literary Iris, but you know, the motivation is the lavender because what you just said about how it helped your headache.
Mm-hmm.
I found that when I remember one time I was in such a rush. They were working on our home.
Oh, Lord help you.
It was a total mess. And I had not RSVP'd because I didn't know if I could make it. I mean, the whole kitchen was like torn to pieces. And it was very frustrating. And I didn't know if I could make it. And I remember something like that time, they had to leave at a certain time and the house was a mess. And somebody was able to watch the kids. And I thought, I got to get out of here. So I remember I emailed you the last minute. I said, Iris, can I still come here? You're like, yeah, sure, come on by. And I came and I was all frazzled. And that's often the case, even without the people fixing my house, but to top it off. But I remember then when I came there and just being surrounded by the lavender and just being outdoors like that in your farm, because that's where you do, once in a while when you host a literary event, usually it's outside.
Correct.
Especially like in the warm weather. And I really, by the time I left, I mean, between the literary talk and between
The food.
the food, with which you always include lavender in it, and then you sent some lavender with me at home, and I returned home a different person than what I came out. So, so I'd love for you to elaborate more about that with regards to its, how is it therapeutic, and how has it been living that, and also, aside from the therapeutic aspects, it's just somebody following their dream. There's a lot in that too, because everybody has a different dream that they pursue, and obviously this was yours, and you make it happen if this is something, it's your calling, and then you just pursue it. So, please share.
Well, it was interesting because Becky died in 1996, and I was already involved in Seven Ponds because I was busy gathering information for my book. And so I'd planted these lavender plants in my perennial island, and I was weeding and deadheading and that kind of thing. It was beautiful, beautiful day, and the sky was blue. And I have this testimony on my blog too, if anybody wants to read it in detail.
What's your blog, the address?
It's yuleloveatlavenderfarm.com.
Okay. Yule, can you spell it?
Y-U-L-E.
Okay.
Like
You
Yule
love it.
Tide.
Yes.
That's the name of our road.
Yes.
So it was a beautiful day, and my nose always runs when I'm gardening. And so I pulled out my tissue, and it smelled like lavender. And I looked down at my foot, and there was a lavender shrub that I had just pruned.
Hmm.
Now, the scent and the oil in lavender, by their nature, by the way it's created, is soothing. The root, the Latin root to lavender is lavar, which means to wash. So it also cleanses. So I use lavender and vinegar for my cleaning agents at home. So what the oil does is, as you handle it, it gets into your blood system, and it travels to your brain and your nervous system, and it says, chill out, everything's going to be okay.
That's what happened to me that day.
Yes, and I saw it happen to you, Liam.
Yeah.
I saw you slow your steps, and you just stood there like, is this place really real?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very magical,
Mhm.
honestly. I feel something.
Mhm.
It's and what I mean by that is, I think whenever you use a word where you can't really describe and pinpoint it, it's that kind of energy that you can't really see exactly, but you can feel it in your heart, and it transforms you, even though you might not be able to touch it, maybe not even smell it, but there's something that's happening that's transformational, and that's why I call it magical. So between the scenery, between the smells going on, between just the loving air, that's the energy, because obviously it's important to have good company, which there was, and I think that whole mixture, and the food, it's always we're always presented with very healthy food, so that's the kind. So within hours, so imagine if we actually lived like that. And it's funny when you were explaining about where your background, because I know when you read your work, when we're at the when we meet for our writers critique group, and when you read your work, and I always tell you, I feel, here I am, I'm somebody who came from Baghdad, and my ancestors, my grandparents came from this one village, this what used to be a Christian village in northern Iraq, and they were farmers, and they lived very healthy lifestyle, very just very family oriented, faith oriented, and the way some of the stuff that you describe in your writing, I connect to it.
Oh, yes.
Because I said, wait a minute, this, it's a different location, but the same heart is there.
Yeah.
And the same thing of me coming here, you come to this area that's so totally different. But yet, I too ended up going back somehow to my roots, whether through my writing or whatever I can. And now I live in this city that's nicknamed Little Baghdad. I came from, I came to this not having a single Middle Easterner in the school, to now living amongst that, and when I take my daily walks, I pass by Baghdad grill and stuff, the smell of the shish kebab. But what a beautiful world that we can, no matter what our backgrounds are, I think when our hearts connect to it, we can make the other person, the listener, and because actually the reader too, but sometimes I just really enjoy just even listening to these stories. But when I read your stories, I feel there's so much honesty and depth there, so there's so much connection. So there is a lot of meaning when you write with intent, when you fulfill your purpose. Somehow, for whatever reason, when you are doing that, you become an inspiration to others.
Well, we can't inspire others unless we are honest, and we give those details. One of the modern trends in literature these days is to eliminate details. Readers are impatient. They just want action. Well, they're not going to get that from me. Details are important. It's important that, for instance, in the memoir cookbook I'm writing, I mentioned that I turned a chicken pot pie over on a plate, and it landed on my right shin instead, and it blistered, and I had a shape of Africa on my leg for all my adolescence. It didn't disappear until I was after I was married, but I was married young at 21. So anyway, so I mentioned that in my memoir, and one of the members of our writing group said, that just resonates with me, because when I was in school we had to make some kind of art project, and she said, I shaped mine in the shape of Africa. So why why are we eliminating our details when a detail to me is going to be very appropriate for some reader out there?
Well, and the other thing is, when we're eliminating details, we're also doing that in real life.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And this is why people are really, like, in a lot of cases, snapping. I call it, there's such an imbalance that happens, because our attention to detail is what makes our life feel sacred, and these little things matter. And when you start feeling like little things don't matter, well, what happens is then you feel like you're so little in this world, and you don't matter either.
Right.
Right. But when you see that all these little things that were given to us on this earth, whatever, there's paying attention to these details is a way of our gratitude for being alive.
Right.
And so when you see these details, and then when you're sharing them, then I realize, like, oh, well, she's just human just like me. She has the same details that I have, even though, you're from the United States and I was born like thousands of miles away, and we had such a different upbringing and everything else. But the details make me see that we have more similarities than differences.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a great theme in my novel as well. And getting back to the farm, it was a decision. And first of all, it was a vision. I'm standing in the perennial island, minding my own business, trying to get that work done so I get back in the house and write my novel. So I look over the empty fields to my left, and what do I see? What you see in the pictures. Rows and rows of lavender. That's what I saw, instead of an empty field. And I believe God said, okay, Iris, time to grow lavender. And I said, wait a minute. I have a book I'm writing. I've been writing it for 15 years. I want to finish this book. But I've learned not to say no to God. I say yes. Say yes to these wonderful ideas. Because life is, as you've mentioned many times, William, it's about service. And if we don't serve, we are the loser. And I know that. Having lost my daughter and been ministered to many times, I knew it was my time to serve, to welcome mothers and fathers and children, siblings who've lost a sibling, to invite them to my home, taste the lavender, smell the lavender, cut the lavender, take it home with them, maybe take a lavender brownie home with them, take a sachet, take a piece of my suffering home with them so they could pass it on if they wanted to. And it was such a blessing, very difficult at times. Physically, to build a farm, to plant over 2,000 plants, to groom it, to cook and to serve, especially difficult people who don't get that this is a service and they demand it. So I made a deal. I said, okay, God, I'm 55. What if I give you 10 years out of my life? Because I'm not going to be able to write during those 10 years. I'm not one of those superhuman people. I do need a little bit of sleep a night. So I felt like I had his approval. So I walked in the house and told my husband what happened. And I'm the visionary. He is not. And he got that very frightened look on his face like he usually does when I ask, guess what? Because he did the same thing when I told him about the Writing Your Legacy workshops. Guess what, Mel? But that vision happened in the shower. So the 10 years were marvelous.
I think this vision with the Lavender Farm, he had to get involved.
Oh, yes.
With the writing, it was like, at least, you're on your own.
It's solitary, right?
Right, but I believe he does help you with the farm. Yeah.
Well, and right now, I left him home. Well, he is home. I didn't leave him home, but he is home. I hope he's doing this. This was a project I gave him. I had one of my daughters and her boyfriend at the time made 5 sandwich board signs for me. I mean, they're as heavy as, I can barely lift them anymore. And we use them for the farm.
Okay.
When I wanted people to get to my place,
Mm-hmm.
Signages, all that kind of stuff is what I hated doing.
Mm-hmm.
Marketing, all that kind of thing. But you have to do it.
Yeah.
So anyway, I loaned them to a friend, and now I'm having this book party, and people have to know how to get to my house because we live a little bit off the beaten path.
Mhm.
Not far, but
Mhm.
just enough to get a person confused.
Yeah.
So he picked up those signs this morning. So now I asked him to paint them so I can put something different on them.
So he's working right now.
Yeah,
On the, you know what? There's I wanted. This was the
my
hen
chickens,
house. Your
yeah.
chickens. Happens very few times, but it's happening right now because we're down to the 3-minute
Yeah.
mark, and I told you when you came
Yeah, I
in,
know.
I said this is gonna fly by.
Yeah.
There's so much more I'd like to talk to you about,
Yeah.
but there's always other times.
Sure.
Because I know, you were the past president of the Detroit Working Writers, which is now a 118-year-old organization.
But I wasn't the first president.
No, you were not, but you were past president. Yeah, no. You wouldn't be here. There's spirits, I'm sure. The woman that started it all. It used to be Detroit Women's Writers, and yeah. And now I'm vice president of that. And it's so funny how things, when I met you and then, here we are,
Yeah.
we somehow continue to cross
Yes.
paths. And we're having, and you are on the board and you're very involved with it. And we're having a conference on November 10th.
Yes.
You're going to be there.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. So you've really played. So you have been in service in so many different ways. And I do have very little time, but you want to share just a little bit, your experience with regards to DWW.
Well, when I started my writing life, I didn't know where to begin. And I heard about the conference, the annual conference at Oakland University, sponsored by Detroit Women Writers. I attended, and it changed my life. I saw such an attitude of professionalism. These women were published women who knew the ropes. They knew the rigors.
And supported each other.
Oh, absolutely. I heard exactly what I needed when I walked into that place. Because the conference is geared for the person who is wanting to write, the person who has been writing, and then the person who has so many credits to their name you can't count them. So immediately I dove in. I applied, and they accepted me on condition that I work at improving my craft because I needed to. So I loved that encouragement. They listed, the new membership chairperson at that time listed books for me to purchase, to read, and to improve my craft. I did, and here I am today.
And here you are. And I want to tell people, so aside from the conference, this is a great, wonderful community that
Yes.
helps you as a writer. And there are a lot of also other local communities, and this is an important aspect aside
Right.
from writing and everything that we talked about. And I am out of time. I
Sure.
am so looking forward to coming to the Lavender Farm, and I'm so happy for your book. So
Thank
it's
you.
out. It's available wherever books are sold. The Mantle, and I'm very excited for you, Iris. Thank you for coming on my show.
And thank you for the invitations.